Welcome everyone to today's Explainer. Get ready because we are tackling an absolutely fascinating topic today. G9, biology, UO3, LO3, complex inheritance and human heredity, and basic patterns of human inheritance. If you've ever wondered exactly how traits and sometimes even genetic conditions are passed from one generation to the next, well, you're in exactly the right place. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. Objective, basic human inheritance. 2. Dominant versus recessive patterns. 3. A worked example focusing on cystic fibrosis. 4. A misconception check on simple trait myths. And 5. A formative check and recap. Section 1. Objective, basic human inheritance. So our primary goal today is really to figure out how traits and certain genetic disorders get passed down through basic inheritance patterns. To do that, I absolutely love this metaphor from the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. Think of your genetic information as this massive, multi-volume encyclopedia that gives your body coded instructions to make proteins. In this encyclopedia, the chromosomes are the individual volumes. We get one set of volumes from our mom and one from our dad. Inside those volumes, the genes are the specific topics or entries. And the DNA? Well, DNA is the molecular code, literally the letters, spelling out the entries of our genetic encyclopedia. If we all had the exact same letters, we'd be identical twins with everyone. But it's those tiny spelling differences that make us unique. Sometimes, though, a spelling change or a mutation causes a protein to malfunction. Section 2. Dominant versus recessive patterns. When those spelling changes pop up in our genetic encyclopedia, they generally play by one of two major sets of rules. First up, we've got autosomal dominant inheritance. Autosomal just means the gene is hanging out on one of our numbered non-sex chromosomes. But dominant is the key word here. It means you only need a single copy of the mutated gene from just one parent to actually have the disorder. Because a parent with this altered gene has a 50% chance of passing it on to each child, you're typically going to see autosomal dominant conditions show up in every single generation of a family tree. Conditions like Huntington's disease or Marfan syndrome follow this exact dominant pattern. On the flip side, we have autosomal recessive inheritance. Again, it's on a non-sex chromosome, but recessive means you have to inherit two copies of the mutated gene, one from mom and one from dad, to actually have the disorder. If you only have one mutated copy and one working copy, you don't have the disease. You are what we call a carrier. A classic example of an autosomal recessive genetic disorder is sickle cell anemia. This really cements the fundamental difference between the two. Autosomal dominant, you just need one mutated copy. Autosomal recessive, two mutated copies required. It's such a simple numerical rule, but it literally dictates the flow of traits through human history, and it even explains the traits you have right now. Section 3. Worked example, cystic fibrosis. All right, now that we know the basic rules, let's actually see them in action. We're going to use cystic fibrosis to map out a real-world statistical model of recessive inheritance. Cystic fibrosis, or CF, is a recessive disease caused by mutations in the CFTR gene. Normally, this gene produces a protein that regulates the flow of salt and fluids in your cells. But when it's mutated, it leads to a buildup of thick mucus, persistent lung infections, and some other pretty severe complications. Because it's recessive, remember our rule, a person has to inherit a mutated copy from both parents to actually have CF. Now, what's super interesting here is the exact mathematical probability. Let's say two parents are both CF carriers. That means they each have one normal gene and one mutated gene, but they do not have the disease themselves. For every single child they have together, the stats are locked in. There's a 25% chance, that's 1 in 4, the child inherits two mutated genes and has CF. There is a 50% chance the child inherits one mutated gene and becomes a carrier, just like their parents. And there's a 25% chance the child inherits two normal genes, meaning they don't have CF and they aren't even a carrier. And remember, every single baby has this exact same probability, totally regardless of what happened with our older siblings.
Section 4. Misconception, simple trait myths. We have just covered some very real, very clear genetics, but it's time to put on our Mythbuster hats because some of what you might have been taught in previous science classes about simple genetic traits is actually completely false. Take a look at this incredibly powerful quote from evolutionary biologist John H. McDonald at the University of Delaware. He says, "It is an embarrassment to the field of biology education that textbooks and lab manuals continue to perpetuate these myths." He's talking about the classic human traits used in biology classrooms everywhere to teach basic dominant and recessive genetics.
Think about it. Have you ever been asked in a class to see if you can roll your tongue? Or maybe to fold your arms to see which one rests on top? Or to check if you have a hitchhiker's thumb? Textbooks love to claim these are simple, one-gene, dominant versus recessive traits. But they aren't. The science actually shows that tongue rolling is not simply dominant to non-rolling. Hitchhiker's thumb? It actually exists on a continuous sliding scale of thumb angles. And arm folding? It has little to absolutely no genetic influence at all. So, you might be wondering, why does teaching these myths actually matter? Well, because teaching bogus traits causes real-life confusion. Take arm folding, for instance. If a textbook tells a student that having the right arm on top is a dominant genetic trait, and two left-arm parents have a right-arm child, well, studies show about 11% of children have a different arm folding preference than their parents. If they believe that fake genetics lesson, that student might wrongly conclude they were secretly adopted, or that they aren't related to their biological father. No way, right? That is a terrible way to teach biology. We absolutely have to stick to accurate, verified science. Section 5, Formative check and recap. Let's make sure we're walking away today with a rock-solid grasp of the real, verified science of basic inheritance. Here's a quick, low-stakes question for you to test yourself. Think back to the beginning of our explainer. If a parent has an autosomal dominant condition, what is the exact percentage chance that their child will inherit that altered gene? I'll give you a second to think about it. All right, the answer is 50%. Because the parent only has one altered gene to give, it's a literal coin flip for every single child. Just to quickly recap our core concepts today, basic human inheritance relies on these major patterns. Autosomal dominant requires only one mutated copy of a gene to express the trait or disorder. Autosomal recessive requires two mutated copies, one from each parent. And we saw this recessive model perfectly illustrated through the real-world example of cystic fibrosis, where two carrier parents have a 25% chance of having a child with the disease. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. We learned today that things like tongue rolling and arm folding are actually classroom myths that wildly oversimplify our genetics. So if those stated traits are actually myths, what else about our biology is vastly more complex than a simple textbook diagram? Keep asking questions, keep looking at the real data, and never stop exploring the incredible encyclopedia of human genetics. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.